Gwyn, Lord of Sunlight and Cinder, head of the royal family of Anor Londo, I've come to put an end to you, and take your place as Lord. Oh, really? But I just finished setting up my rig. Your rig? Yes, Amazon finally delivered my RTX shitload graphics card for my PC. I can finally run Dancing with Anime Girls VR at 10 trillion FPS. You poor bastard. I love Whiplash. It's one of my favorite movies of all time. The acting, the story and cinematography, and the music all really infatuated me when I watched it. I happen to love movies quite a lot, actually, so much so that before I started gaming videos, I actually wanted to critique movies. And Whiplash was one of the movies I really wanted to talk about. Sure, it was because I loved it and thought it had some interesting things to say, but also because I have seen many a music channel look at Whiplash, because on the surface, it's a music movie. That's part of the reason I watched it in the first place. I was a band kid in school, a tuba player, in case you were wondering, so the movie naturally caught my eye. And I'm not dissing music channels that look at the movie this way, because of course they're going to. It's their job, it's their niche. I'm just using this as an example to make a point that will become clear in a minute. Many of them complained about how inaccurate the movie was in terms of actual instrumentation, how the drumming was much easier than the movie was making it look. And, well, it's not incorrect, it does miss the point. Because despite appearances, Whiplash isn't about music. It isn't about the drumming. Sure, that stuff is the pretext around the story, and in my eyes is entertaining regardless of how accurate it is, but it isn't what the movie's about. Whiplash is a story of corruption. Terrence Fletcher is a cynical and bitter old man, and he takes a young man who, by all means, should have had a bright future full of love and connection, and pushes him onto the same path he took that made him into this monster. To say Whiplash is a movie about music or drums is correct at first glance, but in reality is rather short-sighted, and misses what the movie is truly about. Again, not shitting on these music guys, it's their job, and you can review a piece of art through whatever lens you desire. Dark Souls is hard. There's no denying that, it's kind of part of the series' identity at this point. And there are plenty of videos discussing that with basically every Souls game. I'm not saying this is incorrect, but playing Dark Souls and simply concluding that this game is hard is much like watching Whiplash and concluding this movie is about music. Like, yes, you are technically right, but you're completely missing the point. I hate it when people, mostly FromSoft fanboys, reduce the Souls games to their difficulty. Yes, we all get it. Dark Souls is harder than a Greek man when he hears the word bussy, but that is not the point of Dark Souls. Much like how Whiplash simply used music as a vehicle to communicate its themes, Dark Souls uses difficulty to communicate the brutality of its world. The world of Lordran, once holy and divine, is overrun by hollows, demons, and beasts. It is used to make you, the player, feel small, because the developers wanted the world to feel large. But it's not the point, it's not why people love Dark Souls, which I will get to. Much like the music channels talking about Whiplash, I'm not saying this to shit on the people who speak on Dark Souls difficulty, but my fear, which I have seen justified firsthand, is that this turns away some people from playing some of the best games ever made. Because, this may shock you, not everyone likes being beaten to shit, bent over backwards, and fucked. When someone asks me if they should play Dark Souls or any of the Souls games, I inform them of the difficulty, sure, but I also make sure to stress that it isn't the point of the game, and that it isn't nearly as bad as people say. With any other series, I wouldn't feel the need to, but with Dark Souls' reputation, I feel it's warranted. Except Dark Souls 2. Don't bother playing Dark Souls 2. So I'll say before I go any further, if you are watching and haven't taken the chance on these games, I'd recommend playing them for yourself. They are in no way similar games, but much like Outer Wilds, the Souls games are games that are best experienced blind.
Yes, indeed. The dark sign brands the undead. And in this land, the undead are corralled and led to the north. Where they are locked away to await the end of the world.
For many, myself included, the experience with the first Dark Souls will be a test of intuition at the start. I remember getting lost in my first playthrough of Bloodborne, but my god did I have trouble finding where to go in the undead Bergen Parish my first time around. On one hand, this does make exploring more rewarding, and more relieving when you finally figure out what you have to do. On the other, it's irritating. I consider the opening, the Undead Asylum, to be the best introduction to any of FromSoft's games. Most of them start with an enemy you're supposed to die to and bypass, and in Dark Souls 3 you have Yudik's Gundyr, but the Cemetery of Ash is rather bland and empty for a tutorial area. The Asylum Demon probably won't give even new players much of a challenge, but it is a good way to get introduced to the base mechanics as well as potentially plunging attacks, which will be useful later. Now comes the thing, the Miyazaki special, one of the massive brass testicles dangling from the dick that is Dark Souls. It's level design. Everyone who's played this game remembers the first time they ended up right back at Firelink Shrine when they thought they were across the map. I consider this to be Dark Souls' greatest boon, and it, like much of the lightning in a bottle in this game, is something FromSoft have tried and failed to fully replicate since. Bloodborne gets pretty close at times, but Dark Souls really is in a league of its own when it comes to level design. Not allowing warp for the first half was wise, as the players actually have to get familiar with the world itself, and they'll appreciate all the details more as a result. Plenty of shortcuts through multiple levels, as well as segments like Blight Town connecting to multiple areas of interest, makes the world feel real, believable. What? You seem to be talking up a real storm about the game, huh? Well, yeah, it's one of my... What about these? I suppose that's inevitable. Dark Souls is an incredible and majestic game, but there are some massive asterisks that come with it. The most obvious would have to be the levels in the second half of the game, after you get the Lord Vessel, which, goddamn, speaking of majestic, it's a truth, whether FromSoft fans want to admit it or not, that many of FromSoft's games aren't exactly finished. Some games are better than others in this regard, but even in Elden Ring, which I consider to be their greatest game, I could tell that the mountaintops of the Giants was a rushed area, with hardly any original enemies, and the ones that were there were mostly just icy reskins of what came before. It was very obvious that they were pressed for time when designing that area. The only game of theirs I've played that was completely immune to this was Sekiro, but Dark Souls is by far the worst example of this problem. I mean, just walking into Izalith and seeing the Taurus demons lined up, you can practically see what it was like to control V them in. It looks terrible. Not to mention the place's boss lineup. You got the Centipede Demon, which forces you into narrow strips of land and a sea of magma, where your main enemy is the camera. Ceaseless Discharge, who has a total of like 4 moves, all of which are easy to dodge. And do I even need to explain the Beta Chaos and why it sucks? No. No, I don't. It sucks harder than Blizzard employees when they find the breast milk. Not to mention that while the game has mostly great gameplay and rewarding exploration, sometimes it bends you over, sticks a toothbrush up your ass, and cleans you out. Example. Congrats, player. You've rung the first bell of awakening, and you've even clawed your way to the depths. You even managed to get the chamber door open and established a foothold. But oops. Looks like you fell into one of the hard-to-see holes we placed in these narrow corridors, and oh no, it looks like you ran into our in-game representations of Redditors, and they killed you. Now you're cursed, meaning your health is halved. This is a problem that needs solving, especially considering the high damage encounter coming up. But how do you remove curses? Well, you little shit. You need to go all the way back to the first bell tower you rung. And make sure you have at least 3,000 souls on you when you get there. What the fuck? Dark Souls has rough patches. I talked about Izalith already, but there are areas that are close to as bad. Take the Tomb of the Giants. I hope you've got the Sunlight Maggot, because otherwise you're going to be playing as Stevie Wonder. And there are some choices that will piss people off more than anything else. The Anor Londo archers are a classic example. Like, I'm not going to pretend this is good design, it's just irritating. I already mentioned the Bed of Chaos, but seriously, there's a boss in the game where you have to jump to kill it. In fucking Dark Souls, the platforming in these games is ass. But lore. The Souls games are well known for their lore. Hell, VaatiVidya's channel, along with many others, exists solely to try and untangle the many clues and messages hidden throughout the games. Now, I love the lore of all the games, though Bloodborne is my favorite, and I actually got to hunt for it myself for the first time when Elden Ring released. It's a surprisingly fulfilling experience. Dark Souls 2 has some interesting bits of story to it, I don't hate it at all. However, it lacks subtlety. I mean, I was soured on the story the moment the game opened with a bunch of old hags telling me I was gonna die a bunch, like really? And the bit with the family melting away because of the curse, it's all very on the nose. Part of the reason I prefer the lore of Dark Souls over its sequels is that it has subtlety, which Dark Souls 2 doesn't have. And I don't think I need to explain Dark Souls 3, like that game is the opposite of subtle. Meanwhile, Dark Souls has quite the stacked lineup as far as backstory is concerned. You've got Santa del Diablo, lots of Bones.jpg, Raven from Teen Titans, and of course, a New York City cab driver whose shift has just ended. The theme that holding on to the things you love is futile, for all flames eventually fade. When you fight time, time always wins in the end. And the ending is what really does it for me. Gwyn is built up in pieces throughout the game. You hear about him vaguely from characters like Frampton Guinevere, and holy moly, he ruled this place. He's quite something. Much like in gay intercourse with a complete stranger, the player may not know what to make of this guy. But a few things are clear. He was a major player in defeating the ancient dragons, he sacrificed his soul to keep the Age of Fire burning, and he was a king who ruled over the most beautiful and powerful kingdom in the land. This creates an expectation. He did everything he could to fight the dark, even going so far as to create the dark sign which inflicted the undead curse, the reason you end up hollowing in the first place. He started this cycle. He caused everyone to slowly lose their minds. Words like powerful, dignified, evil, tyrannical, or strong might be your first impressions of Gwyn hearing about him throughout the game. But you gather the Lord Souls, you endure, and push to the end. And when you get there, there will likely be a realization. It will be faint, subtle, which helps me appreciate it, but I'll bet it's there. You hear about this figure, this god, this man who, for good or ill, began the hollowing of man to preserve his Age of Fire. Whether it was out of desperation and fear, or strength and determination, doesn't matter. It's only now, standing on the ashes of the first flame, that it occurs to you. The irony, that after all these years of the curse, all those who have been made hollow, and after all these cycles, that Gwyn, the Lord of Sunlight, conqueror of the stone dragons and king of Anor Londo, hollowed. Lost to his own curse. And all that's left is to replace him. Either choice you pick, I like this ending, though it honestly could be way better if they just added better music. Dark Souls is a game about a ruined Majesty, and ironically, I believe that the game's majesty in and of itself has also partially been ruined. I firmly believe that fans and critics talking about the Souls games as though difficulty were their defining feature makes discussions surrounding the games worse, and I do think it makes them far less approachable, despite the insane levels of success achieved by Elden Ring. I honestly think prioritizing this focus around any game in the Souls-like genre is more likely than not doing the game a massive disservice, especially if it's one of the best ones like Lies of P, a game that I believe not only respects and emulates much of FromSoft's work, but even improves upon it in many ways. It's a game that I think is better than all 3 Dark Souls games. I should probably make a video about it at some point. Again, this isn't meant to be shade thrown at videos about this topic, I just think focusing on this kind of misses the point and undersells the true value these games offer. But even aside from the discussion surrounding the game ruined its own majesty. There's so much to love about Dark Souls, and while I believe the pros do outweigh the cons, I honestly wouldn't blame someone at all for dropping it because, yeah, sometimes it's just bullshit. And I'm sure I'll be made fun of for this, but sometimes it's a little bit too hard. I'm a massive fan of FromSoft's work, and I've put days into every game they've ever made, but I will not for a second pretend that their games are perfect, any of them. Except for Sekiro. I don't have too much enthusiasm for restricting these games' identity to their difficulty, but what annoys me far more than that are the fanboys that try to pretend that these games are without flaw. It is entirely possible, hell I'd encourage it, to love a game while also accepting its problems, of which FromSoft's games have many. What matters is that the end result, the package they create as a whole, is usually a masterpiece of a game that uses the power of video games in a way that no one else has been able to. But Dark Souls is special. It wasn't the first, but I imagine those who played Demon Souls when it came out may not have realized they were witnessing the beginning of a monster, one that would start an entire subgenre in the industry. However, Dark Souls was what brought to life many of the ideas that have been iterated on since. Things like the interconnected levels, perfectly subtle environmental storytelling, the best real gank boss in Ornstein and Smo, and of course, the themes that the series could never let go of. All of this is lightning in a bottle, and while it saddens me that FromSoft hasn't been able to recapture all of it since, it does mean that Dark Souls is truly a one-of-a-kind experience. And despite this ruined majesty, I believe that if you haven't played it, you really should. As dumb as it sounds, you should play this ruined majesty, to experience this ruined majesty. I'm not saying it's definite, but my next video or two may be late. I'm currently in the process of trying to learn how to use DaVinci Resolve, and I do mean trying. But eventually, I hope to get familiar with the software and start using it to edit my videos, which will hopefully result in high quality content, so it'll be worth it. Some of this 3D stuff's pretty cool. With that said, thank you for watching.